Got 20 seconds. Come on, man, to go.
Keep moving. Good. Get those knees up. Explode. Good. Explode. Let's go. Up.
Rock forward. Let's go. One more. Go.
You are listening to the Fight Strength Podcast with your hosts, Phil Duran and Jason Burgos.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 22 of the Fight Strength Podcast. It is I, your in-house MMA journalist and senior editor at MMAsucker.com, Jason Burgos. And as always, I am tag teaming with the very busy and talented strength and conditioning machine of American top team, Phil Duran, or is it Phil Daru?
So here's the thing. I'm assuming you're talking about the countdown. So what I'm going to actually talk to you about is that in the beginning, to be honest, the way you spell my name is DA''RU. So yes, they're not exactly wrong on how they say it. I changed it because it is confusing. So a lot of people say Daru or something like that. It is pronounced Daru, but Daru just sounds better, kind of flows a little bit. Not to say that I'm totally changing my whole historical background, but basically it's just an easier way to say it. But they weren't completely wrong. So I don't know why you're tripping, Jason.
Well, I mean, because I thought we're boys. I thought you would let me know on the inside, know these things, and you left me in the I think you should just go with that as once you start the acting career and the modeling, Philip Daru, what a name. I think you got it right there.
To be honest, I've been called that since elementary school, going all the way up to, all the way through my grade school years. That's how they pronounce my name. So if you ask my family, that's how we pronounce our name. So
really?
There you go.
Wow. Look at, we're teaching you new things about Phil Daru. We're getting through the onion layers here of Phil Daru. I mean, this is just fascinating. But this past week, you ventured up not at this point. You ventured up to the NYC for the first time since you were a kid. How did you enjoy your short visit, and what was the atmosphere like inside Madison Square Garden for a freaking historic, unbelievable UFC 217?
It was fun. I wasn't impressed by the whole thing as far as like Madison Square Garden, just because of the simple fact that I've already came into it thinking that it was going to be so great and grand, but in all actuality, it was a great event. A lot of people showed up, and we thought that it wasn't going to be sold out, which it ended up being. But it was definitely a good experience, a good time. I seen my cousin for the first time out there in a long while. We got to meet actually in person for the first time, and we got to do the the interview with Ray Longo and met up with Tony Ricci and chopped it up with him. So it's always a good time when you can get with people that you truly enjoy being around. But definitely New York is a great place. I'm going to personally say that I can't live out there because I'm a Florida boy at heart, but I wouldn't mind coming out for stints of time to actually help out. And that may be something in the future that may be possible. So I'm not going to say anything right now, but you maybe see me in New York in stints of time. So Jason, get ready.
I mean, I live in New York, and I can't even live in New York, so I completely know what you're talking about at this point. I am very tired. I mean, as great as it is, I'm tired of it. Maybe you will see me in Florida. You never know. That might happen. We might be neighbors. You never know.
I don't know about that.
I'm yelling across the lawn, Daru, what's up?
Oh, shit.
You got some sugar? On this week's episode, I am excited to say that we will have on a legend in the world of combat sports. Our guest is the cutman to the stars, the one and only Jacob Stitch Duran. However, if you want to check out our previous episodes with the likes of Valerie Letourneau, UFC Norfolk headliner Dustin Poirier, who whooped ass last night, was fantastic, Colby Covington, Ray Longo, then find our pages on iTunes, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Google Play Music, and YouTube. Now, this week's Ask the Roo segment is sponsored by Novogenics. Are you a man who has felt a decrease in your energy levels and difficulty concentrating? Are you packing on pounds faster and losing your muscle mass? Or maybe you've even felt a lacking your sex drive of late, which is never good. If you are, you may be suffering from low testosterone levels. If you are looking for an answer and live in the Jupiter, Florida area, then Novogenics is the place you need to go to get you back to where you want to be. The medical team at Novogenics has helped hundreds of men improve the way they feel and live their lives with their low T therapy treatments. The benefits of taking testosterone are numerous. There's a ton of them. But if you want to get specific, it can help burn fat, improve mood and focus, build lean muscle, improve bone strength and density, improve your libido, you know what I'm saying? And of course, just make you look and feel better. For more information, call the Novogenics Clinic at 561-277-8260 or find them on Facebook and on Twitter at Novogenics. Why wait? Go feel better today. Now, for our Ask Drew segment, it comes from Robert Stevenson. He asks you, Phil, I was wondering if you could shed some light on the periodization strategies you use with your athletes. I have just left university with strength and conditioning honors from Scotland, and my ultimate goal is to be in your position training world-class athletes. Wow, we got a big fan here.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been asked to me, a bunch of times. I've been getting questions about this periodically throughout the time that I've been at American Top Team. And I'm actually going to be doing seminars on this particular aspect of what I do. But when it comes down to periodization, which basically means a planned approach to training to initiate a stimulus outcome, we have to look at the fighter situation and evaluate what would be best for them at that point in time. Now, my circumstance at American Top Team are different than a coach who only has a few fighters that he trains, or even a fighter looking to work his own program. But for me, I have about, over 50 to 60 fighters at a time, all either going into camp or already in camp. So timing and scheduling become a major component. In general, all things are structured congruent to the systems I have in place. Then I will start them off around 8 weeks out when the camp, primarily starts, with the notion that they've been training out of camp to build a solid aerobic and strength base. Now we segment right into what I call phase 1 strength hypertrophy, where the primary focus is on building joint integrity, stability, mobility, strength endurance, basically meaning reps of like 5 to 6 with the rate of perceived exertion around 7 and 8. From there, each week we begin to intensify, lowering volume to about 3 to 5 reps and bringing up intensity to an RPE of 8 to 9. And week 5, I give them a pretty much a planned deload, so they can recover, get that super compensation the next week following into phase 2, and we go from there. Now, heading into phase 2, which is primarily based off of speed, strength, and explosive power, the focus here is to take the muscle and the strength that we've gained and put that right into that high power movement or that power exercises that we'll do on that phase. That will directly correlate, those power movements will directly correlate into the damn.
So much
trying to get this shit out.
information to give. It's tough.
I know, man.
Yeah.
I know. Shit. All right. Directly correlate into the fight. Jesus. All right. So medicine ball throws, depth jumps, hurdle hops, landmine clean and jerks, everything that's going to be efficient for the fighter to actually initiate the response that we want to get, but also keeping them safe. That risk to reward ratio needs to be low. So at that time, as we hit the 2-week mark, we start to taper and bring down the volume and keeping the training session shorter, but still relatively intense. Now, 1 week out, I could do a complete deload where they will mostly focus on their weight cut if they have to and drilling. And that's pretty much it for them. And usually they're already going to the event or to where they're, their hotel or whatever, before the fight. So they're pretty much gone by that time. Mm-hmm. So now when it comes to aerobic work, I match the bioenergetic demands and energy system to parallel the strength work. So out of camp, I want my fighters to work on LSD work, long duration, low intensity aerobic training to build up a solid VO2 max and to get their bodies primed for camp. See, if we do that, then we can easily segment into the camp, and they're already ready to go as far as, being in shape. Once phase 2, we start to implement the anaerobic conditioning, so short sprint intervals, building up that high anaerobic response, but not fully taxing their lactic threshold. So we're trying to make sure that they're getting that short burst of energy and recovering as quick as possible. Now, in phase 2 is when I start to implement more of the short and long circuit training sessions. Now, this is all relative to their schedule, making sure that we're monitoring that fatigue because they're doing a lot of training sessions throughout the week. I've already spoke about that plenty of times on the podcast. Mm-hmm. But primarily, if I have them for 2 times a week, one day in the beginning of the week, because we want to make sure that they're capable of doing all of their training sessions, we're not fully taxing them, will be an anaerobic alactic circuit where they will perform a functional exercise for about 10 to 12 seconds, then switch to the next station for about 5 minutes, and then they'll rest for a full minute, then they'll repeat for 3 rounds. So it'll be like a 3 5-minute round, but they're only working for about 12 seconds tops. Then later in the week, we'll perform more lactic glycolytic endurance, where they'll perform those exercises that we talked about for around 30 to 60 seconds. And again, for 5 minutes, with this time being a 45-second rest and then a 15-second active recovery, so they can actually be ready. And actually, I want them being fully in mind of when they're in the fight at 15 seconds, I want them off the stool. So I get them predisposed to that notion. Now, this is not something that's pretty much set in stone. And sometimes I have to auto-regulate each day, but it's to further the progress of the fighter, to make sure that they're not overtraining, they're not, killing their body and taxing their central nervous system. Now, communication between skills coaches and your fighter is a key it has to be a key understanding. What they did that week and how beat up they are and how they're feeling. We can identify the needs that they need to do or what they need to do per day and go from there. So communication is definitely key when it comes down to that as well. Yeah, and then from there, what happens next. They fight, they win, like Dustin Poirier, and makes it happen.
Now, I mean, quite a lot of information. Now you were in a similar situation to our listener, that you went to college, university, and learned these skills and got your degree, but also you had a bit of an advantage in terms of you were already a fighter, so you kind of went through training processes, saw what worked personally. Now, how long would you say for yourself, and then for someone that doesn't have already a fighting background, how long did it take for you when you really became a strength and conditioning professional to really kind of master it and get all your techniques and methods really together and organized? And how long would you say it would take someone that doesn't have that background? What's the learning curve on really getting a good idea and coming into your own as like a strength and conditioning professional for fighters?
Well, it takes 4 years to get an undergraduate degree. So basically what I would say is that when I was in college, I used to actually debunk a lot of the stuff that my program director would tell us, just because of the simple fact that I was in the trenches at that time. In mixed martial arts is a fairly new sport when it comes down to physical preparation. So you have to really understand the sport first and get a baseline of exercise science, just to have that to go back to. If you have that, you have all the backing, the layout, like I say, a base of knowledge, then you can correlate that into how you learn the sport itself. So if you're looking to be a combat sport strength and conditioning coach, you definitely have to understand the sport. You have to understand the physicality, the psychology of it, and obviously the physiology of it. So from that aspect, I would say get into some sort of, even if you don't have to fight, you don't have to, you don't have to like, get your head kicked in or anything like that. But you can always join a jiu-jitsu class. You can watch sparring sessions. You can talk to fighters. You can go to fights. You can go to amateur fights. They don't cost much. Talk to coaches. Get a sense of the environment that you're going to be working in, because if you don't do that, it's just gonna set you back and not understand fully what you're trying to accomplish as a physical preparation specialist for a combat sport athlete. They're totally different. Their mindset is totally different than any other sport. I can totally attest to that because I've worked with many different athletes in all aspects of life. And I could truly say that fighters are cut from a different cloth. And if you don't understand the sport, you don't understand, like I said, the psychology of it and what goes into a training camp, you're not going to be there too long. You're not going to be a coach for them too long, because they're not going to respect you and they're not going to connect with you on that level. So definitely get to know the sport, get a baseline of knowledge, and then from there, obviously continue education and keep progressing. I do this every day. I take at least 2 hours of my day and I get some, self-improvement going, where I'm constantly learning, constantly understanding what I need to improve upon. Self-awareness is key in this field, in any field in general. Trying to be a successful anybody, you need to make sure that you are definitely progressing and learning what you need to learn on a daily basis.
Now, I mean, to toot our own horn a little bit, and especially yours, I mean, how helpful are shows and podcasts like ours that, can have an expert give you a lot of the tools and strategy? I mean, did you even have stuff like that to listen to when you were starting to gather all your own knowledge?
And I still do, man. I just talked to Joe DeFranco in New York recently, and I've been watching Joe for a long time. Even since I was like 18 when I started up my own gym. I actually, pretty much implemented everything that he did as a strength and conditioning coach and put it into my own practice. So, learning like that from podcasts like this, getting knowledge, even in social media. Now, don't get me wrong, there's bad information and there's good information. You have to be able to identify the two. And that just comes from sources. That comes from knowing the person that you're actually listening to, see what their credentials are, see what results they've, acquired and what they've done. And then from there, you can pretty much dial in on it. But I think it's very helpful. And, it's something that we were lacking, maybe 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, where it wasn't too much. I mean, technology has come a long way. I'm not saying that technology is the main source of where you need to get your information from, because textbooks are still pretty relevant. But at the same time, you want to make sure that everything is fresh and new. And if you're reading on studies and you're reading up on new information that comes out each and every day, you'll be that far ahead of the curve.
All right, Robert Stevenson, I hope, Phil answered your question. Now, this week's guest segment is sponsored by the Iron Neck. You may have seen some fighters training their neck with the Iron Neck and wonder, what the heck is that guy doing? To build strength, most athletes use four-way machines and head harnesses or neck bridging, but when you're using those tools, you're limiting yourself to linear movements, just front and back and side to side, or put yourself at risk of injury. However, the Iron Neck allows you to increase neck strength and mobility in every possible position for true functional training. This means you can actually build neck strength through the same movements you make in your sport, moving freely across 360 degrees. It's important stuff. I mean, the Iron Neck has adjustable linear and rotational resistance, giving you the highest level of control in designing progressive programs for athletes at every level. Also, by doing these exercises, an athlete can improve their own physiological defense against concussions. It's actually the rotational forces from a strike to the chin that twist the brainstem and cause loss of consciousness, which we saw a little bit at UFC 217 last night. So why not increase your neck's rotational strength and turn vulnerability into strength with the Iron Neck? This is a valuable tool for any athlete, trainer, or physical therapist looking to build strength, improve range of motion, and reduce risk of injury. If you are one of those people, you need to go over to the Iron Neck site, because the guys there have recently dropped their prices by $200. That's a big difference. And listeners to the podcast get an extra $25 off by using the code FIGHTSTRENGTH at checkout. Follow them on Instagram at the Iron Neck and visit iron-neck.com to use that discount code, and your Iron Neck will be shipped out same day. It is now time to bring on our guests. When a fight fan says cutman, this man is often the person we all think of. If cutman is in the dictionary, honestly, his picture should be next to it. He has worked all over the world with boxers like Wladimir Klitschko, Andre Ward, Amir Khan, and Chris Algieri. He has been seen tons of times all over major MMA events, working corners for the UFC and Bellator. He has even played a cutman in movies. When you make it in movies, that's how you know you're serious. There is no better name that defines the cutman in combat sports. That name is Jacob "Stitch" Duran. Stitch, thank you so much for coming on the show this week with us.
No, thank you, Jason. Really, I appreciate the offer, and good to have be on board with you and Phil, man. So let's talk business, brother.
Perfect. So Stitch, now tell the listeners pretty much, how did you get involved in combat sports, and how long do you think you will continue as a cutman, though?
Well, I started actually about 30 years ago when, actually my first introduction into combat sports was in 1974 when I was stationed in Thailand during the Vietnam War. I was there as, in the Air Force, and I saw my first Muay Thai fight. So, that whole year I trained in the martial arts and got back to the States. I lived in Oakland, so I got into King's Gym, got into the boxing to kind of improve my hands, and then I opened up my own school of kickboxing, and from there I trained fighters, I managed them, I promoted fights, and I kind of I had to be a cutman for economic purposes, and that kind of floated to the top, and I made the move to Vegas 21 years ago to be with the big boys, and here I am. But people now starting. I guess as I get a little older now, Phil, people keep asking me about, when do I plan on retiring? Hey, brother, I'll tell you, man, I'll be happy just dying in the ring. But in all seriousness, I think as long as the mechanics, as long as everything is outside of psychological, the mechanics are extremely important. But when those start to deplete a little bit, then I'll consider doing something else. But still within the game.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I see that you've been in the game for a long time, but you're still hungry. You're still enjoying what you're doing, which is very commendable. But now, being as that you've been in combat sports for a long time, and I'm not trying to age you, by the way, because you're a young man. I can see it still. You still got a lot of spunk in you, so I'm not gonna do you like that. But what was I would like to know, as a coach and as a former fighter, what was the worst cut that you ever had to patch up? And can you give us like a story, background, or something?
Yeah, there's been multiples, obviously, but one that always floats to the top is, I think Vitor Belfort was fighting Marvin Eastman. This was at the Hard Rock, and Marvin Eastman took a knee, and literally he got sliced. As one fan said, it looked like he got hit with an axe. Another fan said it looked like filleted fish. But as I'm working on Marvin Eastman, you when the cameras are on you, because you got the big old screens on the sides, and I know that the cameras are dead center on me and Marvin, and the fans are going ooh and ah and this and that, and psychology is a big part of being a cut man outside of just the mechanics. So for me to make sure that Marvin was okay, I said, Marvin, this is the biggest fucking cut I've ever seen in my life. And he started smiling, but in doing that, I knew that he was responding to my comments. So everything worked out fine. And I just saw Marvin about a year ago, and we kind of grew up in the same area. So he really appreciated what I'd done for him.
That's cool.
I've been a boxing fan since I was a kid, now for MMA for over a decade, and I've long appreciated the work cut men bring to a corner, because they can really make or break a fight. I would like for you to really inform our listeners and myself about the finer details of your work. Could you tell us everything you carry on you when you're cornering a fighter, and the exact purposes of the tools that that you use as a cut man?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There's multiple things, and that's one of the important things of being a good cut man is to have the proper tools, and then know when to use them and how to use them. And let me just kind of start off when I started being a cut man. I lived in the Bay Area, and I saw a boxing show, and this guy did a good job as a cut man. So I went and asked him that what he did, and he basically blew me off and says, "F you, I'm taking this to my grave, and you got to learn just like me," right? So that kind of embarrassed me a little bit. But once I realized that the game is not so much on secrets, and that's what these old boxing cutmen would rely on, that it was a secret. But once I established what it was, it's not a secret, it's on techniques. But when it comes to the medications, the ones that you see on the swab, Jason, that's adrenaline chloride 1,000. Epinephrine is another word, and that is by prescription only. But that is what they call a vessel constrictor. So you put that on the cut, and it's like folding a hose, a water hose, right? So that's a vessel constrictor. The other two medications that are authorized are thrombin and Avitine, and those are coagulants. And not very many people use those because they're not as effective as adrenaline. And I use a new product now called Quick Aid, which is 100% natural, and it's made out of a seaweed base. So that you just apply on the cut, and it dehydrates it. So those on the medication, that's the sides. We have the KO swell. That's the iron that you see us putting on the swelling. And the theory behind that is cold direct pressure will, if it doesn't reduce the swelling, at least it minimizes the swelling, because you, once again, with the cold direct pressure, you're closing up the blood vessels underneath the tissue that are creating the puddle of blood that's swelling. And then obviously, you need your ice pack and your Vaseline, and definitely little towels to wipe the blood and all that. But those, it's like you're right in the trenches. So those are the things, and gloves. It's important to have gloves, and then I have a wrist wrap where I put my swabs in, because in the old days, and you still see some of the cut men where they put the swabs in their mouth and their ear, and that's pretty old school. But as you look at safety and hazards, that's pretty filthy. So one of the things I've done is eliminate that with a lot of the people that I've been working with.
I mean, aside from that schmuck that didn't want to help you, how long did it take you to kind of get an idea to really master all these things over the years and know all these tools and get things like prescription and understand everything you need? Do you have many instances where, oh man, I'm in the corner, I forgot this, I didn't use this, and anything like that?
No, that's a pretty good question, but it took me a while. I've always been, since I moved to Vegas, I guess let me go back. As a cutman, when I had my school of kickboxing, I was a trainer as a cutman, and I was already regarded as a top cutman because of the work that I did. And sometimes I ask myself, how did I do that, right? But once I moved to Vegas, I got a good relationship with the ringside doctors, and Vegas at that time was the best of the world. So I would get a lot of information from the doctors, and then I would apply that. But it's taken years, and every day I still learn. When I watch the fights on TV or in person, I'm always studying the corners, and I'm always studying the cutman because you can never learn enough.
In an MMA fighting story about, the whole fiasco where you were let go by the UFC, it was mentioned you grew up as a farm worker and dealt with, abusive conditions. Like, can you tell us a bit about, like, your upbringing, what your life was when you were younger, and, has it always been a motivation, that hard work ethic to grind you to the really superior success you have now?
Yeah, that and it has been a motivation, but, I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley of California, right in the Central Valley. So as you look at the map of California and you pinpoint kind of like the middle, that's where I grew up I think Fresno and is like 50 miles south of where I grew up, but I'm between a bunch of orchards. But I was born and raised in a migrant camp, and my birth certificate says CPC camp number 12 for the California Packing Company. So I grew up there, and then I moved to a little town of Planada, like 1,500 people, but we're all farm workers. So basically, I did that all my life till, I got out of high school and walked on to college, and then from there left college because I couldn't afford to go to school and join the military. But that has always given me the drive to, the hard work that we did and the discipline that, my father and my mother always gave us, that, if you're going to do the job, you got to always do it right. And so that has helped me, and it's carried me on. And, I know when Bellator did their show in San Jose a couple months back, I got in on Friday. The show was going to be Saturday, and I rented a car and drove 2.5 hours to my hometown just to go and hang out with the friends I grew up with. And, and I inspire them because of the position that I'm at. And, I got to go to, my alma mater, my little high school, and watch a football game, and then drove right back to San Jose. So to me, that's a big drive. And I always, I'm like, I was in London with Wladimir Klitschko and Anthony Joshua, 90,000 people. And, the first thing that comes across my mind is, I hope my friends and family in Planada are proud of me, so I do a lot of that. And I know Roberto Duran stopped me one time, and, he's a big legend, right? And he stopped me on my tracks, and he said, you know what, I'm very proud to see you on TV doing all the work and, representing all the Latinos, and, to get a guy like Roberto Duran give you a compliment like that, then, you're doing something right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I have one more question. I'm going to skip the one I had, and then Phil, you could take over the next one after this. I have to ask, you grew up a migrant worker, Donald Trump, thoughts?
Fuck him.
Yes, that's what I was looking for.
And George Lopez would say, fuck him.
Yeah.
The thing about it, and it's funny that you say that, because I went to a restaurant yesterday afternoon to pick up some food, and there's one guy that I work, he worked for a promotion years ago that I hadn't seen this guy in 10, 15 years, and he recognized me. Anyway, he invited me to a comedy show, Latino Nights and all that, and we were talking, and he kind of grew up in the San Joaquin Valley also, but he was saying last night, he said, I went over there and I worked the fields one day, and I don't know how these guys did it. But, Trump is insane to think that, the economy will continue doing what it's doing without having people like myself to go out there and do the work that nobody else can do. And as you see all these people in the corners, asking and begging for food. Very seldomly do you see anybody of a Mexican or Latin descent doing that, because we're all workers. But that's, we'll take those kind of jobs and we'll accept that type of money. And building the wall, I think, was the stupidest thing, because as a matter of fact, Vicente Fox from Mexico, the old ex-president, did a little satire on them. And he says, Donald Trump, you build a 20-foot wall, we'll build a 21-foot ladder. So that's not going to happen. Economically, the United States, when it comes to the fruits and vegetables, would collapse, and we'd all be paying double and triple money because nobody else is going to pick them.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so this is a two-part question, Stitch, but I want to know, you worked with multiple combat sports and organizations, and in your opinion, who is it easier to work with, from an MMA fighter or a boxer or a kickboxer? Which one gave you the most problems, or are they all kind of equal? But what was like the most headache of athletes that you had to work with?
It's good, and Phil, I kind of fall in a different position than everybody else, because number one, I'm there to take care of them. But MMA guys are just so humble. I just have so much respect for these guys. Number one, they're the baddest dudes in the world, right? But they're just so humble when I go in there. And to me, these guys get all excited when I go wrap their hands for the first time, and I understand, But when it comes to guys just being jerks and all that, if you go more into the boxing side, not that they're all jerks, but these guys will pass you by. The thing with MMA fighters, kickboxers, they'll stop and take pictures with fans. Randy Couture, I was flying home with him from Penn State last weekend, and he gives everybody the same attention. Now, if you had let's say an Oscar De La Hoya, they would continue walking right by the fans and said that they don't have any time or anything like that. And so they a little bit more arrogant, but MMA guys are the best.
All right, so here's the second part, though. Have you ever had any problems with coaches in the corner while you're with the fighter working on them at all?
No, not at all. I've had some guys that I've had to kind of slow down a little bit, and and I was thinking just about that the other day, because I can't remember the fight that I worked in. Oh, Javier Mendez. I can't remember the fighter, but the guy got cut on the left side, and Javier walks in. And, he wants to stand on the left side. And I tell him, let's move sides, because position for me is everything. And right off the bat, he knew what I was talking about. And he got on the right side, and I was on the left side, and I started working directly on the fighter. But, these guys understand that if I'm in there to give this fighter every opportunity to win the fight. And they know that I know my business, and it's a team effort. But that's a very good question.
Now, it's good to see that they respect you and they understand the quality that you're bringing to their fighter. And that's definitely something that needs to be commended upon you, because if anything, man, if you don't get them right, they're not going to be able to perform. And that's on their coaches as well. So good job, brother. You know what I'm saying? You've been doing this for a long time, but I've seen it and I've been watching you forever. I've been a part of the fight game for a pretty long time. And I can honestly say that I wish I could have got my hands wrapped by you, but maybe we'll do it just for fun or something on video. Are you gonna?
And it's funny. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
No, go ahead. It's all good.
Oh no, I was gonna say it's funny because after this comedy show last night, this girl comes up. You're Stitch, and I'm a Muay Thai fighter, and she probably wasn't. Maybe she's done a little bit of kickboxing, but. God, I'd love to have my hands wrapped by you, So I guess that has become a big, big thing. But it's funny because I was telling the guys, I'm a veteran also, but I've always gone and supported the military. So I've gone to Afghanistan, and I've done trips with Tim Kennedy and, a bunch of other guys, and to Europe. And I was at Langley Air Force Base last month, and Eustis Army Base, and I wrapped the hands of a 2-star general, right? And this guy now, because I do that, every time we do something, I always pick somebody out, and I'll wrap the hands, and then I'll cut it off, and I'll tie it back up, and I'll give them, basically it's a cast of their hand, but wrapped by me. And then I have my own Stitch premium tape, so it has my own name on it, right? Well, this general, he was, the the cocky, aggressive two-star general, and we're talking to a bunch of the soldiers and in the gymnasium and all that, and I wrap his hands and man, you're talking about his whole profile changing. He just became that much more macho. When I put the wraps on him, and to the point where the following week I get like an 8x10 photo of him and I together, and he autographed it for me. So that was pretty cool. But one of these days, man, we got to hook up. I'll be more than glad to wrap your hands, Phil.
Awesome, brother.
One of the most interesting parts of your career for me was that you were the longtime cut man for former unified heavyweight champion, now retired, Wladimir Klitschko. How did that working relationship come about?
Well, it's a crazy life, because now here's what happened. Back in December the 12th, 1991. Vitaly says December the 12th, 1992, but it was when the Soviet Union first broke. They invited a team of boxers and kickboxers from the United States to go to Kiev to fight the Ukrainian fighters, boxers and kickboxers. So at that time I had Mark Longo, which was a kickboxer, and we got together with some boxers out of New York and all that. So anyway, we took some teams up there, and the understanding I had was when the Soviet Union first broke, these KBG agents ended up with all this money, so they decided to promote the first professional fights in the Ukraine. So we were there, but then I see all these posters, giant posters of these two young athletes, and they're at the fights. So I mean, they're as big as pillars, right? So this Vitaly and Wladimir Klitschko. So years later, going down the road, they come to Las Vegas to train, and everybody's in awe on them because they look so much alike and this and that. And so I go and I tell them the story that I was in Kiev and all that, and I showed them the poster, and so that was our first relationship. And then the movie Ocean's 11 came out, and I was cast as a cut man for Wladimir Klitschko during the movie, the lights go out, but he's fighting Lennox Lewis. And so anyway, I spent 4 days with him, and then down the road, I used to co-host a radio show, the 13th Round, here in Las Vegas with Nick Ward, and him and I are standing outside of the MGM in the hallways watching people walk in, and just being fans. And Emmanuel Stewart walks by, and he's doing his commentating for HBO, and he has his tuxedo on, and he brushes his eyebrow, and he says, "Stitch, I need to talk to you about Wladimir." And I look at Nick, my partner, and I said, "Did you just see what I saw?" So yeah. So the next day, Wladimir Emmanuel calls, and he asked if I'd be interested in working with Wladimir, and I said, "Yeah, of course, right?" So it was great because my first fight with Wladimir was after he had lost his world title fight to Layman Brewster. Okay. And this was his first comeback fight, and he was fighting DeVargo Williamson at an outdoor event here at Caesar's Palace. So, I'm there, and Vladimir's warming up in the dressing room, and people don't know this, but I'll kind of give you a little behind the scenes. He's warming up in the dressing room, and he's I guess, throwing an uppercut, and he hits his nose, and it starts bleeding. Oh. And I'm thinking, so here I am, my first day, and he's bleeding in the dressing room. So I go, they call me, and I go and I straighten it out. But during the fight, then, he's winning the fight slightly, but he's not looking real good. And, he gets dropped like in the fourth round, and but he's still winning the fight. So going into the fifth round, we're talking game outside of the mechanics and the psychological, but also knowing the scoring system. So this was basically what I call the UFC cut, right between the eyes. He had a big old, like the one Forrest Griffin had when he fought Shogun. Okay. So I've worked on those before, but I knew that at that point, his biggest percentage or point of winning the fight would have been right then and there under the rules. So I told Wladimir and Vitaly, and Emmanuel Stewart couldn't hear, but I said, look, you got a bad cut. You're winning the fight. I'm going to have the doctor stop the fight. So when the doctor came in, she asked us, well, Stitch, how does a cut look? And I've worked with her many, many times, and she knows that I'm capable of doing those kind of cuts. And but what I did is I kind of opened it up. I squeezed it, and I opened it up. I said, it's a pretty bad cut. So she stopped the fight, and it went to the scorecards. He ended up winning the fight, and years later became the heavyweight champion of the world. But the following day, she had called me and says, I called Vladimir and I called Emmanuel Stewart, but I want to let you know that the doctor said that it was a good thing that you stopped the fight when you did, because the cut was close to an optical nerve. And if you would have cut that nerve, you would have had double vision. Wow. So that was my first introduction. And, it was great working with Vladimir for 10, 12 years. And to show you how classy these guys are, and they're the classiest guys in the world, December the 16th, Vladimir is inviting the whole team to a resort in Austria, and all expenses paid. And we're going up there for the weekend, and that's kind of a tribute of him saying, thank you guys for being part of the team. And nobody does that anymore, so the classic guys.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up Emmanuel Stewart, because it transitions perfectly into my next question. Because without doubt, he's one of my favorite, managers and analysts. Like, his understanding of the sport and the way he was able to explain it, I just admired so much. What was he like? I mean, do you have any interesting stories about Emmanuel Stewart?
About Emmanuel Stewart?
Yeah.
Oh man, there's so many great stories I have, and for me it was just an honor. And like I said, I used to co-host a radio show, and and Emmanuel Stewart, every time I would call him for an interview, never said no. But I was telling people that the best corner I ever worked was when Wladimir Klitschko fought Samuel Peter. It was Emmanuel Stewart, Vitaly Klitschko, myself. We were the three main guys. But Vladimir got dropped like 5 times, right? But Emmanuel Stewart was so professional at what he did that he literally kept Vladimir in the game and kept his composure and gave him the proper instructions. And nobody gets dropped 5 times, because those are 10-8 rounds, right? Yeah. Nobody gets dropped 5 times and wins a fight. Vladimir ended up winning the fight. Wow. And I have to give, Emmanuel Stewart all the credit in the world for doing that. But, he's such a classic guy. And, he had the Kronk Gym uniforms, right? With the Kronk Gym and all that. Well, he sent me some shirts that he made himself that on the back says Cutman Stitch, and they had the Kronk Gym on the front. And to me, that just came out of his heart. Yeah. But, the last time that I spent with him was literally on his birthday. It was July 7th in Bonn, Switzerland, when Wladimir Klitschko was fighting. And July 7th, because that's the same birthday as my wife. And, we're having lunch and we're shooting the shit and all that. And then we do the fight, and, and I see him at the airport for the final time. And, he walks to the left to his plane and I walk to the right to mine. And then that was the last time I ever saw Emmanuel Stewart. But I'm really honored to say that we worked together, and I could have called him a friend.
I mean, during your career, you've worked a lot of events in Europe and in the U.S. Have you ever noticed, is there a big difference between American combat sports fans and European combat sports fans?
Oh, yeah, man. I'll tell you what, you go to like the UK or you go to Ireland and all that, these guys are insane. And, like say the fight that Vladimir had with Anthony Joshua at Wembley Stadium, there were 90,000 screaming Brits, but in America, that would be like 150,000. Yeah. And these guys, they're big fanatics, man. And they definitely like to drink their beer, and they like to get loud, and they appreciate a good game. And, one of the things that Vladimir was so honored about, even though he lost the fight with Anthony Joshua, was the respect that the British fans gave him. They applauded him, and to the point where, when he called me, I told him, I said, my son said it best, because I was in the Balboa movie when Rocky fought his last fight. And if you remember, as he's walking out, the people cheered him on. And then on the movie Creed, when Adonis lost to Ricky Conlon in a great battle, the fans cheered him on. I said, well, that's what the fans did to you in Wembley Stadium, but this was no movie. This was the real thing. And Vladimir says, Stitch, of all the respect I've gotten throughout the world, I've never got the respect that I did like I did that night. And, that was a great moment for all of us.
This is my last question. I mean, I really, again, appreciate all the time you've given us. What has your experience been like working for Bellator and Scott Coker exclusively? And, what are the differences you've noticed between them and the UFC?
Yeah, well, it's that's a good question, too. It was funny. Let me start it off this way. One of these top journalists when we did one of the Dynamite shows. And in fact, he's mentioned it a couple of times. He says, Stitch, doesn't this, talking about Bellator, doesn't this remind you of the UFC the way it was 8 years ago? And I said, yeah, it does. And in saying that, when I first came on board, and Dana was saying that Stitch and I were never friends. Well, it was bullshit because I used to see Dana in the gym. We were training fighters. He was doing hand pads for the wives of these executives, So Dana, in all fairness, Dana would never worked with he maybe worked with a C-level fighter, but he never worked with a B or A level fighter. And if he worked the corner, he probably just carried the bucket. So that was him. But we always showed a lot of respect to each other, right? And when he brought me on board, the UFC was like the best of the best. Everything that they did was great. Everybody was friends. We're friends. And, Dana was a down-to-earth guy. And then he got into that, Trump mentality where becoming an asshole would create money. And, but I've known Scott Coker when I had my school of kickboxing. I've known Scott for 30, maybe 35 years. My fighters used to fight under his promotion. It was way before he was Strikeforce. So Scott and I, because he's from San Jose and I'm from the Bay Area, I used to live in Oakland, and then I had school of kickboxing in Fairfield. So Scott and I have known each other for many, many, many years, and it's the same Scott Coker that I knew then. He has never changed his personality, and he's there for his theory is fighters first. So as you can see, the evolution of the game is changing now, where the UFC is really it's like the scales. It's things are getting heavier for them, so they're going down as Bellator is going up. And now that they're going to have this 8-man tournament, I think it's going to take them to a different level. But it's a pleasure working with Bellator, and and it's funny, Jason, because so many places I go to, even when I'm at events like Bellator or boxing, people will come up to me and say, you know what, man, F Dana, F UFC, F Reebok, man, you did the right thing for, speaking out about the unfair justices of how they're treating fighters and all that. And so they never forget, that's pretty awesome.
Is there anything, do you, for the people that aren't following you yet when they really should, in terms of social media, do you want to just plug, if you have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, any websites you want to promote, anything you want to let our listeners know that you're working on, anything like that?
Oh, man, I'm always working on everything. I've created a brand for myself, right? And so I'm at Stitch Duran, and I guess hashtag Stitch Duran, but there's also a couple books that I wrote that are available at Amazon.com or Kindle, and they're called From the Fields to the Garden. And the name of the book was The Fields, because I grew up as a farm worker, and the garden was, my goal has always been, or always was, to make it to Madison Square Garden. So that's hence the name of the book. So that's From the Fields to the Garden, and then the second one is continuation of the first one, which is From the Fields to the Garden 2. And those are available at Amazon. And but I have my own line of Stitch Premium Tape that is available at cutmanforhire.com, and so I'm always hustling, brother. I've created a brand for myself, and marketing is one of the things that I've kind of always felt was important for anybody's career, and so that's what I'm doing.
All right, Phil, you know about that hustle. You want to hustle and give them your social media as always?
Yeah, no problem. So all my social media handles except for Snapchat is Daru Strong, DARUSTRONG, not Daru. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
And then Daru Strong 1 for Snapchat, and check out my YouTube when you get a chance. It's Phil Daru. That's it. Very simple. And I want to thank Stitch again for coming on, man. It's an honor to actually get to speak with you, and we'll meet sometime soon. I got to go out to a Bellator card with Mo, so maybe we'll cross paths and I'll say what's up.
All right, yeah, please come on, man. It is a pleasure talking to you guys, and good questions and a good show.
All right, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. Talk to you next time, Stitch.
All right, anytime. All right, guys.
All right.
Bye.
All right, now also remember, you can always follow us on Facebook at Fight Strength, on Twitter at FightStrength_. You already know the deal. We're on all the social media, the iTunes, the iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Google Play Music, and YouTube. Big thanks to our sponsors, Novagenics and the Iron Neck. That is our show for this week. See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.